much, Dr. Preeta Nair, for inviting me and to make this lead presentation. Dr. Ajay Kumar, Dr. Ajit Kumar, Ms. Madhur Kankana Roy, Dr. Abhayan, eminent scholars, ladies and gentlemen. I am very happy that you are organizing this conference, this international webinar on mystical hybrid beings in the sculptural art of the Asian region. I have spent most of my academic life in trying to decode myths, because mythology is the science of primitive man, his manner of explaining the universe, according to Spence. Man as a symbol-using animal appears to need not only to act, but also give other symbolic reasons for his acts. And therefore, today I'm going to talk about the mythification of hybrid beings. Hybrid beings are found in several civilizations, such as Egypt, Mesopotamia, and India. Some are gods, some are demons, and there are several deities who have a demon equivalent but are not connected, but may not be connected. In order to absorb these hybrid beings, many of whom were probably of tribal origin, elaborate myths were created to absorb them into the Puranic pantheon. And I shall now make a presentation. Okay. So, mythical beings are as old as civilization. And I'm not going to talk about all civilizations, but a couple of them which are near to us. Take Egyptian religion, ancient Egyptian religion. Horus and Ra symbolized two different steps of the sun. Ra was the highest, and therefore he was the most important. He had the full sun on his head covered by a snake. And the three gods who represent Horus, Ra, and Osiris, who represent the sun, coincide with our Trivikrama, where Vishnu has 3 steps, and the highest step is the step that is unknown to human beings. So I'm just showing you a few similarities before we come to India. There are, of course, many others. Tefnut, she was worshipped in the form of a lioness, while the Greeks identified her with Artemis. Hathor was a cow. Tauret was the hippopotamus-headed goddess. Seker was the hippopotamus-headed goddess. Now, I mentioned to you earlier about the sun, and Ephura was the setting sun, a man with a ram's head surmounted by the sun. Every evening, he would get into his barge with the sun, and his cabin was protected by the serpent Mehen, who sought to protect him from the terrible serpent Apep, who wanted to destroy the sun every night. Now, this is what they thought, that the sun came up every morning and went down somewhere underneath the world. I mean, don't forget, we are talking about a very primitive people. We have Buto, who was a winged cobra, and Anubis was the fox-headed lord of the land. In fact, Anubis was very powerful, and kings prayed to Anubis to expand their lands, to conquer more regions and so on. And I must tell you something very interesting. When I went to Saqqara in Egypt, and the minute the car or a bus or anything comes, suddenly a whole lot of dogs come in asking for food. And they all looked like Anubis, only their faces were yellow, the color of the desert. Sekhmet was the terrible lioness-headed goddess of war, who battled with Thot, an ibis-headed man. There are many more, each with a mythology and a definite place in the Egyptian pantheon. When the followers of one animal fought and won, all the animals of the loser were killed. For example, when the tribe of Sebek, the crocodile god, fought the tribe of Bastet, the cat goddess, all the cats were killed. I hope you can all see the presentation.
Excuse me, ma'am, we cannot see the presentation.
Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. 1 minute, let me go back and see. Okay, sorry. I'll just go back and show you what I was talking about. These are Horus and Ra. Ra was the midday sun, who is the Horus, Ra, Osiris, with the falcon head, were the equivalent of Trivikrama, who had the 3 steps, the highest being the...
Excuse me, ma'am, can you make it to the slide mode?
Can you see it?
Yeah, now it is okay. Now it is fine.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
The next one is, how do I remove the stop thing? Sorry, 1 minute. There come on. I minimize this. Okay. I don't want it because then they can't see it. Okay, never mind. Tefnut, I mentioned, was the lioness. Hathor was the cow-headed god. And Sebek was the Seker was the crocodile-headed goddess. It's not moving. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the sun, the setting sun was Ephura, and he was a man with a ram's head surrounded by snakes who protected him from the evil, terrible serpent Apep, who sought to destroy the sun every night. Buto was a winged cobra, and Anubis, whom we see here, was the lord of the land, and who was worshipped by every ruler who wanted to expand his properties. Then we have Sekhmet, who was the terrible lioness-headed goddess of war and battle. And then we have we have Sebek, the crocodile-headed god, and Bastet, the cat-headed goddess. Now, why were there so many? Each tribe in Egypt identified with one of these animals. So they were like totems. And when the crocodile people defeated the cat people, not only did they take over the land and probably raped the women and took away properties, all the cats were killed. The live cats were actually killed as a symbol that our God is superior to yours. So these were symbols and these were totems. So they would take over the cat, and then there would be a painting where the cat would be sitting at that is Bastet will sit at the feet of the crocodile. It's not moving. Okay, just sit here, please. Now, similarly, the Assyrians had hybrid deities. I'm just showing you a couple. Kursa was the divine lion-headed eagle. In fact, there is greater similarity between Mesopotamia and India. And even the myths are very similar. In the case of Mesopotamia, very often the deity is human-headed with the body of the animal. And many of them influenced India, like Ishtar is the goddess, and her vehicle was the lion. And it was soon after that that Durga in India was given the lion as her vehicle. The Greeks, like the Vedic people, were more pantheistic and did not have too many hybrid animals, but I can mention Pegasus, who was a winged horse, and the centaur, which was a man with the hindquarters of a horse. So it is in every culture that we find these hybrid animals. To absorb hybrid beings, an elaborate mythology was created for each. And I'm going to talk about it in the Indian context. Now, the earliest hybrid being in India was the horned deity of the Indus Valley civilization. The first three-headed male figure, this one, suggests Pashupati, since he is surrounded by several animals. The next does not have any animals. But if you notice, both have these buffalo horns. Many scholars identify them with the bull, but the bull does not have such circular horns. And I believe that they were the horns of the buffalo. The second also has a pipal leaf above the horns, and you will find that the earliest scene of worship in Mohenjo-daro was the worship of the pipal tree. Now, there is no doubt that these were tribal icons, a proto-buffalo deity. And such a deity is still worshipped in as Mahasoba in Maharashtra, MAHISHASURA in central India, as in the Toda language, and Mahisha in the rest of India. Now, how was this brought into the pantheon? This is a case very similar to the Egyptians, who brought in the defeated animal as a suppressed being. So we have Durga fighting Mahishasura. Most of the Indian tribes used buffaloes for their milk, skin, flesh, etc. The cow was popular much later with the Vedic people and especially with the Krishna cult. Till then, it was the buffaloes which were grazed all over the country. The Gonds and Maria Gonds celebrate the buffalo as their god, and the Todas also worship the buffalo and live on its milk. They're probably the only vegetarian tribe in the world. But the buffalo grazing tribals were soon defeated by the food producers, who were probably the Dravidians, because it is the goddess of fertility, who destroys the buffalo. And generally, goddesses are more popular among the Dravidian deities. Thus, Mahisha became Mahishasura, the buffalo-headed demon who was destroyed by Durga, and a myth was created to emphasize the defeat of Mahisha by the goddess. I think you all know the story of Mahisha and how, according to the legend, the demon lived in the Vindhya mountains against central India, and by the practice of severe austerities, gained the strength to drive the gods out of the heavens. So Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva issued flames from their mouths. Durga emanated from these flames as a beautiful woman with 10 arms riding a lion. Sometimes she is also depicted with a tiger in some parts of India, like Bengal. She held each deity's special weapon in each of her 10 hands: the discus, conch, club, trident, spear, flame, bow and arrow and quiver, snake, and the thunderbolt. As Durga approached the Vindhyas, the demon tried to capture her. Unable to do so, he attacked her under several forms, each of which was destroyed by Durga. Finally, Durga killed Mahisha. Mahisha is associated with the town of Mysore. Now, if we go further, we will find that these tribal deities have definite associations. Mysore was formerly Mahisha Uru, or the city of Mahisha the buffalo, named after him. In fact, it is locally believed that he was a local ruler killed by the goddess, and a huge statue of a mustachioed male figure of Mahisha holding a sword and a snake stands at the foot of Chamundeshwari hill, at the top of which stands the temple of Durga as Chamundi, killer of Mahisha. So it is very obvious that who is the winner, because Durga Chamundi was kept at a higher level on top of the hill. Whom did the goddess defeat? Now, less than 100 kilometers from Mysore are the Nilgiri Hills, where the Toda tribe lives, a tribe that worships the buffalo as a god and whose origins are shrouded in mystery. They venerate the buffaloes, whose horns, the horns of the dead buffaloes, adorn their temples. They are buffalo herders, and until recently supplied milk to the other tribes through a barter system. So sacred are the buffaloes that no other tribe was allowed to own any. The Toda buffaloes are enormous, handsome animals who are fierce fighters if approached by strangers. It is likely that the Todas were defeated by the followers of the goddess, who were the agriculturists, because the Todas are basically pastoralists who graze their buffaloes. They also have a tradition of being the palanquin bearers of Ravana. So you can see that their origins are very different. And besides the buffalo worshipping Todas, there is also a subcaste called Mahishi in Karnataka, whose followers still worship the buffalo. The defeat of the buffalo king is similar to what we saw in ancient Egypt, where the defeat of a tribe meant the defeat of its animal icon, its hybrid icon, and the takeover of the icon. Fortunately, the destruction of the tribe worshipping another animal did not result in the killing off of all the animals of the defeated tribe in India. At least I have not come across any examples of the same. Now we go to Ganesha, who is the most popular hybrid figure. And do you know that the earliest elephant hybrid figure is a 7th century BCE scribe from Luristan in Iran? I've written a book on Ganesha, so I've researched this extensively. Now, could this have been the earliest Ganesha, the writer of the Mahabharata? Because here he has a scribe, he has an elephant head, he has a snake, everything that we know about Ganesha. Later, thereafter, we next see him in Gardes in Afghanistan, where he was worshipped by the Shahi king, King Allah. Now, whether Ganesha was a foreign origin or belonged to a tribe in India, he was assimilated into the Hindu pantheon through several myths, and his worship became very popular in the Deccan thereafter. According to one Puranic story, the Devas approached Shiva for help against the demon. Shiva consented, and out of his mind appeared a beautiful child with the head of a powerful elephant. Seeing this beautiful child, Parvati placed him on her lap and vowed that no endeavor, human or divine, would be successful without a prayer to the young one. Shiva then made him leader of the Ganas, or celestial hordes, calling him Ganapati. In another Purana, the same story is modified, and Parvati was annoyed that the child was born without her intervention because he was a Manasika Putra of Shiva, willed that his head should be turned to that of an elephant. However, when she saw the child, the elephant-headed child, she felt great love and again said that nothing would succeed without a prayer to Ganpati. And a more popular legend deals with the birth of Ganesha to Parvati. Once, while she was going for her bath, she rubbed off the dust and oil from her body, and out of it created the figure of a young boy. She infused life into the figure and told him that he was her son and should guard the entrance and not let anyone in. Soon after, Shiva came to see Parvati, but the young boy blocked his way and wouldn't let him in. Shiva, unaware that he was his son, became furious, fought with the boy, and severed his head from his body. Parvati was so angry when she saw her headless son that she threatened as Shakti to destroy the heavens and the earth. So great was her sorrow. Then Shiva pacified her and sent his Ganas to bring the head of the first living being with his head towards the north, the auspicious direction associated with wisdom. They did so, and the first creature they found sleeping was an elephant. They brought the head of this animal, and Shiva placed it on the trunk of Parvati's son and breathed life into him. And again, Parvati said that every effort, whatever one does, should start only with a prayer to Ganpati. Now, it is obvious that after the Shaivites and the worshippers of the elephant got into a fight or whatever, and the elephant-headed god was taken over by the Shaivas, the goddess, mother goddess, has given him a definite role that everything should start with Ganesha, with a prayer to Ganesha. So this was maybe a treaty between different tribes, different people in the Deccan, by which Ganesha got this superior position. Now let us go to the Dashavatara, who are the most obvious hybrid beings of India. I'm going to take up only 4 avatars. Matsya. He was a little fish who asked Manu to save him. Manu kept him in a jar. When he outgrows the jar, he asks to be put in a tank. When he outgrows the tank, he wants to be taken to the river and thereafter to the ocean. There, Manu is to build a ship and board it when the floods begin. This is a grand flood story popular in many civilizations. It is interesting that Dwarka, the city which was destroyed by floods according to the Mahabharata and whose remains have been found underwater, is the site of the Shankhodara temple, the first temple which celebrates the Matsya form of Vishnu. In fact, you won't find Matsya temples. He'll be part of the sculptures in other temple, in a Vishnu temple, the Dashavatara. But there are no separate temples, or very unheard of temples maybe. But Shankhodara is the one temple dedicated to Matsya, where he is represented as a 4-armed figure with the upper torso of a man and the lower torso of the fish. In art, he is occasionally represented as a full fish pulling the boat after defeating the horse-headed demon Hayasura. And we will come to Hayasura a little later. He keeps coming back again and again, the horse-headed figure. So this is the fish who is now identified with Vishnu, who is destroying Hayasura, the horse-headed demon. The next incarnation is Kurma the tortoise. Now, Kurma was the deity of the Bhils in Andhra Pradesh, and Sri Kurmam in Andhra, not in Andhra Pradesh necessarily, I would say central India, but Sri Kurmam is the only extant Kurma Kshetra. However, to include him in the Hindu pantheon, we have an elaborate story of the churning of the ocean by the Devas and Asuras to obtain sacred nectar or Amrita. Vishnu appears as the tortoise to give a base to Mount Mandara, and the snake Vasuki is the rope. Some scholars have identified the Samudra Mantana as representing the Indian Ocean trade, particularly in view of its popularity in Southeast Asian art, especially in Cambodia. Now you can see on the left in this one, the tortoise is the base, and this is actually here they've only kept a pot with a stick above it, but you will also see Mount Mandara and the Devas and the Asuras pulling from either side the snake Vasuki. Generally in art, he has a human face and body and a tortoise. The lower part is a tortoise. The next incarnation, for whom an elaborate mythology was built up, is Varaha the boar. Now, Varaha is believed to have taught man agriculture. And that is why he is portrayed as extricating Mother Earth from the waters, because the boar digs into the earth in search of food. And that is how people learned that if they dropped some seeds over there, those sprouted also. It also symbolizes saving her from the deluge of sin in which the earth was engulfed. There is always a philosophical co-explanation. He killed the demon Hiranyaksha and saved the Vedas. The most famous home of Varaha is the temple town of Tirumala. In Indian tradition, the boar is closely associated with the waters, and he is believed to be able to predict the coming of the rains. His ability to lift the earth with his tusks probably linked him with the tilling and ploughing of the soil, an agricultural activity. So you will find everywhere that the agricultural people keep coming in, that these hybrid deities come from a time where there was a change from pastoral to agricultural. The story of Varaha is thus the story of the beginnings of agriculture, described as rescuing of the earth from the all-consuming waters, represented by Hiranyaksha, a demon. Naraka, we have Narakasura, but he was the son of Varaha and Mother Earth, and is identified with the Rigvedic demon of drought, Vritra. As the boar plows and saves the earth, Vishnu conquers drought. And it is a triumph of agriculture and man's ability to produce food. Naraka's grandson is King Bali, who visits his subjects every Onam in Kerala, celebrating the harvest. Bali was Varaha's great-grandson. So you see how a local boar deity, a hybrid deity, becomes part of the whole pantheon, becomes an incarnation of Vishnu, and is celebrated. So it's in one part of the country. And each of these deities, from the fact that Matsya is in Gujarat, Kurma is in central India and Andhra, Varaha is in the south, it means that these were local tribal deities in that area. Now here we have a deity with a very definite origin. Narasimha, the man-lion incarnation of Vishnu, was the god of the Chenchu tribes of southern Andhra Pradesh, where thousands of Narasimha temples can be found. Narasimha is portrayed as a lion-headed man. Sometimes Lakshmi is seated on his lap, and this form is known as Lakshmi Narasimha. And his most famous temples are in Ahobilam, Simhachalam, and so on. The proliferation of the cult and the association of the story with several sites in Andhra Pradesh suggests that Narasimha was a popular local deity who was integrated by making him into one of the avatars of Vishnu. And to do that, an elaborate myth of Narasimha coming out of a pillar and destroying Hiranyaksha was created, because mythification of these characters was very important. Otherwise, what is the reason to suddenly include a lion-headed creature? Another hybrid we know, Hanuman, a monkey with a human body and a face and a tail. Actually, in my opinion, Hanuman was never a monkey. He was a Vananara, a person of the forest. If you read the Narada Ramayana, with which Valmiki begins, you will find that he is not a monkey, but he has become a monkey in India. He was celebrated for his strength and his ability, which enabled Rama to win the war in Lanka, kill Ravana, and take Sita home. He is also the penultimate example of bhakti or devotion, which he showered on his beloved Rama and Sita. My own feeling is that Hanuman became the monkey and is celebrated as a fellow primate, because you will go all over India and you will find that nobody wants to kill monkeys. Now, Vaikuntha Vishnu is a complex form of Vishnu, first referred to by the name Vaikuntha in the 7th century Vishnu Dharmottara Purana. He is four-faced Chaturmurti with the heads of a lion and a boar on either side, flanking a human head. He is also identifiable in this form by the epithet Paravasudeva, the highest god. The lion and the boar represent his Varaha and Narasimha avatars. Carved in low relief on the back of the halo is a fourth face, a demon, grimacing, representation with fangs and a vertical third eye on the forest. Now, I don't know whether this is a demonization of Shiva because he has the third eye. The earth goddess Prithvi stands between Vaikuntha Vishnu's legs. From the 8th to the 10th century, this form of Vishnu was the paramount cult icon in the kingdom of Kashmir. Now, many of them display sectarian rivalries. For example, Sarabesha and Gangaberunda. Sharabha is a part lion and part bird beast who, according to literature, is 8-legged and more powerful than a lion or an elephant, possessing the ability to clear a valley in one jump. In later literature, he is even described as an 8-legged deer. According to Shaiva scriptures, Shiva assumed the form of Sharabha to pacify Narasimha, the fierce man-lion avatar of Vishnu. After all, Narasimha was a lion, and when he killed Hiranyakashipu and saw so much blood, it is believed that he became fierce at the smell of blood and started going on the rampage, and people were scared. So Shiva came in the form of Sharabha to control Narasimha. This form is popularly known as Sharabeshwara or Lord Sharabha. The Vaishnavites, of course, refute this portrayal of Narasimha as being destroyed by Shiva Sharabha. And other Puranas narrate that Vishnu assumed the form of the ferocious Gandaberunda, the double-headed bird, to combat Sharabha. So there are, this is obviously two figures who represent Shaiva Vaishnava rivalry, which was very popular or very, which prevailed, I wouldn't say popular, which prevailed after the 10th century. A case of sectarian rivalry between Shaivites and Vaishnavites. Both sides would have been hesitant to have Shiva and Vishnu fighting each other directly. So they had these hybrid incarnations fight each other instead. Now, some enemies became deities, and we go back to Hayasura, but first, Garuda. Garuda was once an enemy of Vishnu. They fought, and neither was defeated. Finally, Vishnu asked him to become his Vahana, and he agreed. But Garuda was also not a very pacific Vahana. When Shiva brought out the snake, Vishnu brought the snake into his life, Garuda was very angry because the story of Garuda and the snakes. That's an elaborate myth, and that shows the documented rivalry between the Garudis, who were a people in Maharashtra who worshipped Garuda, and the Nagas, who were also there all over India. So the Garudis and the Nagas were constantly at war. And that war is also reflected in Garuda fighting Vishnu, not to include the snake in his life. Now, Garuda has an eagle's face and wings and a human body. Then I told you about the horse. I don't know why the horse was regarded as a demon, perhaps because the people on the horse won every battle, and those who didn't have horses did not. But this is a guess of mine. But Vishnu, at the request of a sage Urva, killed a demon called Hayasura, who lived on Manikutta hill. At the last moment of his life, the demon took refuge in Madhava, in Vishnu, and prayed that the god might take up his form and live on in Manikutta. Thus, Hayasura became Hayagriva. And Vishnu had one more incarnation called Hayagriva, who was very popular in Karnataka. Now here is an enemy who is also friend, Gajasura. The elephant demon is a generic name given to an asura who assumes the form of an elephant. It may refer to demons killed by God Shiva, who is Gajasamhara. You have Gajasamhara Murti, where Shiva is like this, standing on the elephant's head, holding it by the skin. Gajasamhara is also another form where the head attached to the elephant, where the demon was killed by Shiva, the head was taken and attached to his elephant-headed son, and god of wisdom was Ganesha. But there is also one more belief that Gajasura was defeated by Ganesha and turned into a rat and made into a vahana or vehicle by Ganesha. In fact, it's interesting that all the vahanas of all the deities are all friends, and their association is a very positive association, except the rat, on whom Ganesha is seated to control him. And then, of course, in the philosophical sense, it becomes controlling the mind, going in different directions, and so on. Thus, the mythification of tribal deities and the so-called demons was a form of absorbing them into the Hindu pantheon. Who were these hybrid beings? Some were demons, including Rakshasas, Yatudanas, Danavas, Pishachas, or ghosts. And some were even ardent devotees of the gods. But most tribes in India were willing to assimilate with the expanding Vedic pantheon, since there was no rivalry over there. Since tribal deities tend to be animistic, they were perceived in animal forms or hybrid forms. In order to absorb them into the pantheon, Hindu pantheon, elaborate myths were created. So thus, the mythification of tribal deities, to repeat what I've written, and so was a form of absorbing them into the Hindu pantheon. Some were gods and some were demons, and there were several deities who had a demon equivalent. In order to include these hybrid beings, most of whom were of tribal origin, elaborate myths were created to absorb them into the Puranic pantheon. Most of the myths come in the epics and the Puranas, especially the Puranas, which, as you know, are a storehouse of stories, all kinds of stories. And it is in the Puranas that you find out where one mythical being lived and where somebody else did not, and so on. So with that, I'm happy to conclude and would like to thank you all for having the patience to listen, and we're open to any questions you may have.